Let's jump straight to the North Shore with our guy, Mike McMillan. And Mike, some games, some teams that I want to get to, but if you don't mind, a team that we actually haven't talked about that much, but I just want you to just go in on the St. Paul's Wolves. They get a win last night. They're not undefeated. They're not necessarily a top 3 seed or anything right now, but they're really good, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. Marshall, I want to get to that real quick. I want to give a quick update. I don't know if you saw our post last night, and we'll come back to the North Lake.
Yes, please do.
A young man, Braden Pierre, was injured pretty bad last night at the North Lake Christian game. It was first play of the third quarter. He went off on an ambulance, went to the hospital last night with some issues, and really happy to report that he walked out of the hospital by the grace of God early this morning. So really happy for him and his family. It was a tough time there on the field.
Yeah. Thanks for updating this. Yeah.
Really, really proud of the whole community that came together during that event. It was pretty neat. But so kudos to him and his family, and great job by the whole community kind of getting together and praying for the young man. St. Paul's. We talked about this previously, and with their preseason stuff they did and who they played with John Curtis and Rummel, kind of scrimmage and jamborees, kind of prepared them for where they're at now. They get another big win last night. Cody Corrales, 12 carries, 141 yards. Brennan Villa, who I know you know, he finally pops off. They haven't really hit him on the deep stuff, and that's what he did really well last year. He had 4 catches, 120 yards, and a touchdown. That being said, quarterback Brady Pearson, he's slowly, I say slowly, his last 2 games have been really efficient for the Wolves. So that's changed them. He threw for over 200 yards and 2 touchdowns last night, 9 of 16 passing. We know about their defense and what they can do. They gave up some yardage last night. I've got to give some props to Northshore running back Ramon Williams. He's kind of come on the scene up here since week 3. He had 24 carries for 153 yards last night against a really good St. Paul's defense. So kudos to him. But, this whole St. Paul's thing is lining up. The next 2 weeks, it's Mandeville and Covington for St. Paul's. So it's kind of like we're back to the North Shore again, right?
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
St. Paul's, Mandeville, Covington, last 2 weeks of the season.
Yeah, and Mandeville and Covington both got wins last night. All right, same question, because I know you've been covering them a lot here recently. Jules Sumner Cowboys.
Oh,
really a wide margin of victory over the Pine Raiders last night. But again, and we've talked about Jules Sumner, and look, it's no secret that they're where they are in the rankings, where in the PowerPoint. So not a secret, but my guess is no one's covered the Cowboys like you have.
No, and look, Coach career there, he's been there a long time, and what they've done over the last 2 years is pretty remarkable. No, I think they're 18-2 now over the last 2 seasons. They're 8-0 so far this season. They had a 2-point loss in the quarterfinals last year. That would have set them up against Dunham, which I think is a great matchup because of what Sumner does on offense. They can play keep away, and we talked about that this week when we interviewed him. They can play keep away better than anybody. The problem right now is they're scoring. They're scoring quickly, so they don't play keep away and really a keep away offense, right? And their wing T, they've got some guys that can really score it. To me, I'm not going to jump ahead for Coach here, but as a fan and a media guy, I'll say I've marked week 10. Jules Sumner at A-Meet is going to be different. It's going to be a special night. A-Meet's got some really big players too. They're now 6-2 on the season. Both teams in district. Both teams essentially should be undefeated going into week 10. It's going to be a showdown at A-Meet.
The other team that I definitely wanted to discuss with you this week was Covington Lions, because you've just been high on their defense all season. And Coach Salter's been high on their defense all season. And in a matchup, again, Hammond's been hot, and that offense has been a big reason why. You mentioned Donut and their other skill guys, but the old cliche, defense travels, defense takes you. And we talked about this with some coaches this week. First cool weather game of the week of the season. So this is kind of that week where you might see some defenses stand up, where we can see your breath a little bit. That's when those big time defenses step up and make plays. And My assumption is that that's what this Lion defense is continuing to do.
You hit the nail on the head, man. It's a 6-0 game at halftime. Covington scores 25 points. They went 25-14. 22 of the 25 points come off of turnovers. They had, they forced four interceptions and a fumble in that game. It's an 18-14 game going into the fourth. So I've got to give Hammond and Coach Buckles and that crew some credit. They've really put themselves on the map as being a contender in that district and really watch for them in the playoffs. But, 5 turnovers, it's hard to lose a game when you get 5 turnovers. Covington did well on offense of just managing the game. I stopped by earlier this week and talked to Coach Salter, and I think their offensive line, he's really impressed with, and they're still kind of figuring some things out. But they do what they need to do on defense so well. Zaylon Bennett for Hammond, their running back, really good running back. He's got some Division I offers. He had 18 carries, 143 yards and a touchdown. So they gave up some yardage last night, but they made some big stops in the red zone and on the plus territory. So huge to them. I can't say enough about how impressed I am with not only their skill level, but the depth they have and the amount of kids that they play. It's impressive. And like I said, they've set themselves up now. It's Mandeville next week and then St. Paul's in week 10. So, here we go.
You mentioned Laranger being able to give Lakeshore a good game. My guess is, without looking at the stats, it was probably a pretty typical Titans night with Loudermilk doing what he's been able to do all season long. But again, similar to Jules Sumner and Pine, a challenge, but a wide margin of victory. And that's kind of taking care of business. So Lakeshore through 8 weeks, they've got to love where they sit in that district race.
Yeah, and I can't say it's unexpected because Coach Indes has just done this his entire career, right? He's always got his teams ready. They're one of the more prepared teams that you'll ever see. They game plan really well. They play really fundamental football. What I'm more impressed with, Marshall, is, Brody Loudermilk had 13 carries for 87 yards last night. He had, another touchdown passing. But what they do so well, and I mention this all the time, is it doesn't matter who it is. When you say next man up, they are the definition of next man up. It's a different guy every night.
On offense and defense, or on offense?
On offense and defense. Like they, and I think I said this a few weeks ago about them, they do what they do really well. And they don't have to be anything different. They don't try to be anything different. They play their game. They play their game plan. And guess what? It works. It works every stinking week. Right. Their one loss comes at Salmon, and, we'll touch on that game here in a second, but Salmon's turning it into something over there in Slidell as well. But, I can't give Coach Indes and that crew enough credit. We had our reporter, Roger Glenn, there last night, and his player of the game was the entire offensive line. They ran for 273 yards last night as a unit. Laranger's offense is kind of built around the run game. So, I thought that they would have some success, but ultimately when Lakeshore's running it and running it well, it's really hard to get the ball back.
Look, I'll add another quick plug. Roger Glenn, man, he does a great job. Whatever game he's at, you'll know more about it than some of those head coaches probably do. Find Roger Glenn on X or anywhere else online.
He's great.
Great work.
I appreciate you giving him a pub, man.
For the Northshore Prep Report. I love keeping up with Roger at the game because he's on it. You mentioned Salmon getting maybe an upset win over Slidell, at least based on how the season's going. They came out with 4A enrollment actually here, so that'll be interesting to see. But Pope bounces back, gets a win. Salmon, steps up and gets that win over Slidell. Bogalusa gets a win over Springfield, which I know is good to see. Get to see the Lumberjacks get in the win column. Before we move off the North Shore, because I got another couple questions for you, what stood out to you in the 985 other than what we've discussed so far?
Well, look, I think the way Salmon won is impressive, and I have to talk about their quarterback, DeJon Howard. He was Coach Tudor does such a good job with quarterbacks, and he said it in the preseason. He's like, Mike, I think this guy could be special. We see some things from him in the pocket that are different. He was 12 of 20 for 223 yards and 3 touchdowns last night. He ran for another touchdown. They have 3 receivers that went off. Terrence Mitchell leading the way with 6 catches, 131 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Slidell was in the game. Slidell played without their starting quarterback. And still played really well offensively, and that says a lot. But Ricky Williams did not play in that game. Jaquan Jones, who has been the leading rusher in the area, 32 carries, 174 yards, and 2 touchdowns. That game is 21-14 at halftime, and it's 28-21 going into fourth quarter. I can imagine the scene in the fourth quarter at Slidell High School last night. Just outrageous. I did talk to Coach Tudor last night. I'll reach out to Coach Page and talk to him. But big game, big credit to Salmon. They're set themselves up. I have to give Chalmette kudos. Chalmette's now 6-2 overall. They're undefeated in district play. They get a big win last night over Fontainebleau. Quarterback Breeze Wilson, he's got big targets and Data Antoine and Rashawn Bangham. Their defense, they got Division I linebacker Tyree Darensburg. He's heading to South Alabama, and kind of the unheralded guy in the defense who to me is fantastic is our other linebacker David Gonzalez. We don't promote him enough, but he's fantastic as well. And then look, Mandeville bounces back. That's good for them and a freshman quarterback. Krukeler, they went 27-0. He has a passing touchdown and a rushing touchdown last night. So, those guys bounce back. And then Franklinton. Let's not forget about the defending state runner-ups, right? That's 2 in a row now. They won since Lakeshore. They won 49-14. 42-20 over Pearl River last night. I'll get stats from those guys here today or tomorrow, but I'm sure Jacob Crane and that crew went bonkers with 42 points. So really impressed with that crew. And then, look, I've got to give North Lake Christian some credit here, right? They lose to Lakeshore. It's a 14-8 game at halftime. And you said, okay, who's North Lake Christian, this year? They've rambled off 4 straight wins. They are in the last 4 games, they've beaten their opponents by a combined 161-7. They've got 3 goose egg shutouts in a row. That defense, some unheralded guys, Blake Drury, Trace Crane, Solomon Giannoloni, Aiden Riley, Max Millett. Don't give those guys enough credit. And then last night, I'll say this. I've got to pull my notes up here, but you'll know all these names, and it's kind of the who's who in what North Lake Christian does. Cam Kasnave, 8 carries, 111 yards, 3 touchdowns. Jordan Willis, 4 carries, 110 yards and a touchdown. He also had a 25-yard interception return for a touchdown. Charlie Gilmore has 2 catches for 31 yards, returns a punt for a touchdown. It was just, and that was in the first half. So, Marshall, it's 51-0 at halftime. The game was coming out with a running clock, and unfortunately, the young man had gotten injured on the first play. But look, North Lake Christian's got district championship next week, at St. Helena, so that'll be a big one.
Yeah, talented team. And look, it was interesting hearing Cass Argis and Jason Dewey say earlier this week that North Lake they don't look like a 2A school, which you can say that around the state. Calvary doesn't look like a 2A school.
Mm-hmm.
Vanderbilt doesn't look like a 2A school. Lafayette Christian doesn't look like a 2A school. Maybe North Lake Christian, maybe this is the start of something. You've got to keep your eye on them for the rest of this season. And as long as they have things set up the way they are, they've turned some boys into men, and they're getting it done. They'll be a threat in D3 Select.
Yeah.
So week 9 we'll have Hahnville and Destrehan. I'm pretty sure both of those teams got big wins.
They did
over this past weekend. So give us the on the scene report for how the Wildcats might be feeling this week.
Well, one, to me, it's one of the best rivalries in the state. It's long-standing. At River Parish football is, I always say it's different, but the games at Hahnville, I believe, it's going to be a packed crowd. They'll have partial gates up and partial stands up, and there'll be people sitting over there at 4:00 with seats. But Destrehan, we knew their offense could be good, but in the last few weeks, they've defensively played really well and sound. His head coach is a former Destrehan coach, right? So, he kind of knows what they're going to do and knows their players, and that goes a long way. I'm really proud of that group across the river at Hahnville. when that place is rocking, it's different than a lot of places. So it's an exciting one. I see this as kind of a high scoring game because I think both offenses can score, but nothing surprises you in a rivalry game, right? It could be a low scoring game because it's a rivalry game. So you never know. Destran sitting there with 2 losses, like we said, to Catholic and Ash in like the first 3 weeks of the season, and they've been on a tear ever since. Honville's only loss came to Terrebonne, in a game that was pretty close. So, both teams are rolling for sure.
One more that I did forget, and we'll get you out of here unless there's something else I missed. It was Thursday night, so it slipped my attention. A-Meet goes to Albany. Albany has the home Pinks, which pretty awesome. But A-Meet gets a really nice win on the road there in an environment where you might think Albany has a little bit of momentum. But A-Meet with two, taking care of Pine last week, and then seemingly another strong showing against Albany. No secret about A-Meet, but just in case we've forgotten, they're good again, aren't they?
Yeah, look, I think they're phenomenal. I'm really high on A-Meet. That's why I think that Week 10 matchup, it might be one of the best in the state. I mean, it's going to be two district undefeated teams playing for a district championship. A-Meet and Jules Sumner. That's an outstanding matchup. A-Meet's defense is phenomenal. They've got a young man, Franklin Morgan Jr. He's committed to Louisiana Tech, but they've got a slew of guys who are just really good defensively. They lead the area. I want to say that, them and Jules Sumner have the top 2 defenses in the area, and they pitched a shutout against an Albany team that I have to give credit to. They're much improved this year. They've scored some points. They've given up some, but, offensively, they've done some really good things. They have a new coach over there, so kind of renewed, rejuvenated atmosphere. But, props off to them. Around our area, John Curtis undefeated at home against Carr, Week 9, right? And John Curtis, no matter what happens in that game, if you play well or you don't, the next week you get rewarded with St. Aug. So you're about to find out who John Curtis, Carr, and St. Aug are here in the next 2 weeks. That's a big matchup. And, St. Aug lost to Carr, but they kind of went toe-to-toe with them for a little while. They're a pretty talented football team, and I could see them making a run. I got to give St. Charles Catholic a shout-out.
Yeah.
Big win over Belchase.
Yeah.
And they did what St. Charles Catholic does. They played special teams really well, played really well on defense. They scored and took advantage of turnovers and opportunities. St. James wins again. And then lastly, Marshall, next week up here on the North Shore, obviously Mandeville at St. Paul's. That's going to be a big one in the community here. A lot of those kids play together growing up. Slidell goes to Chalmette. I think that's a big one for not only Slidell, but Chalmette, right? It's close to prepping for playoff time. So it's not just wins, it's playing well and creating some momentum. And then lastly, we talked about this, but North Lake Christian at St. Helena, that's going to be a great matchup. St. Helena is extremely talented. And, from what I know, both of those teams are fairly senior laden. This thing's been brewing for a few years now. So it'll be a really great atmosphere up there. I'm sure somebody will be streaming that one live.
Gosh, a lot of good games coming up. I'm gonna have to prepare for some of these because those are some unbelievable matchups.
Yeah, they're gonna make me retire from coaching, man. Because I get Friday night, I wake up and I'm excited about Sunday.
I need a clone. Yeah,
no doubt.
Of course, we had 3 games going in the press box last night, so that's high school football in 2025. As you get to keep up with it. Speaking of keeping up with it, Mike McMillan, Roger Glenn, and the crew at North Shore Prep Report. I say it all the time. They know more about your team than you do. So follow them online. They seem to build that site every week with new stuff coming out, new teams coming out that they're going to cover. And you need to follow them because they're going to get you prepped for the playoffs from the 985 and beyond. So, Mike, appreciate you being flexible with us this morning. You're the best. And we will talk to you again soon, sir.
Yeah, no, thanks, Marshall. Lastly, real quick, we just started to ramp up our soccer and girls and boys basketball coverage. So we'll be releasing some of that here soon. We look to cover that stuff at the same pace that we're covering everything else. So we're excited about it. I don't know how we'll get it done, but we'll figure it out.
Keep me posted. Hey, I'm a basketball guy at heart, so that's music to my ears. All right, thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Marshall. Y'all be blessed.
Yep. You